20 years down the road, you're like, wow, my waifu is way more interesting than my spouse. It pays attention to me, is available to me to talk at 3 a.m. in the morning about the most random nerdy tip. They'll be like, hey, did you know that the African swallow travels at a certain velocity per hour? And then the waifu is going to be like, haha, Jeremy, I totally understand. There's a Monty Python reference. You are so charming and amazing for knowing this reference, and everyone's going to be like, yeah.
I have a couple thoughts on this.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Shiyan, how's life?
Life is good. I just chugged a cup of coffee, so I'm feeling great.
Yeah, because you just got off a flight. What time you woke up?
I woke up at 5 a.m.
Where were you?
I was in Tokyo. I just finished a week of pitching.
Oh, right. The LP fundraise.
Always be
fun.
fundraising.
I did see actually the, what's the word? I think it's Instagram stories of you and Eric and, the other GPs, Hustle Fund, I guess. Yeah. And all of you were wearing the shirts, the Hustle Fund shirts.
We always pitch in the shirts.
You always pitch
in the shirts.
What is exactly the word to get on the shirt?
Depends. We have lots of shirts. You may be confused. We could be a t-shirt company or we could be a venture fund.
Check out this swag link, and it was just like this.
.hustlefund.bc for those watching along at home.
Yeah.
Now we've got one that's like, it's a vibe. It's like got the hippo. I'm wearing a Camp Hustle shirt. We have like the standard Hustle Fund shirts.
Oh, that's amazing.
We're kind of on brand. We're not suits, essentially.
We're not suits, is what you're saying. Fantastic. So we wanted to talk about, because we saw some interesting news. I think the 2 things that we want to talk about was, one was Singapore going nuclear, ? And there's one. And then obviously the implications of that and what's the context of it. And then of course, the second thing is, I think there's a sense of, pessimism or cynicism about the ecosystem. I think that we both have this in Q&As and various groups. So I think those are interesting topics to talk about. But let's talk about Singapore going nuclear, ?
Yeah, well, I think you shared a fun article over the weekend, and it was, Singapore could be the most perfect example of a country that needs nuclear energy. IAEA chief.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this on a prior episode when there were other sort of trial balloon types of news articles. But there's some really choice quotes here. Singapore, the most perfect example. Territorial limitations, energy requirements, technological base, and institutional maturity, said Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, on Friday. He was here visiting under the S.R. Nathan Fellowship. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many experts, in terms of options, perhaps Singapore could rightly figure as the most perfect example of a country that needs nuclear energy, because with a very small nuclear power plant, you can have a level of energy density and production that you cannot match with anything else. He notes that the country cannot produce hydropower and lacks territory to produce enough wind or solar to meet its energy needs.
So I think there's lots of reasons for why nuclear energy makes sense. I think let's dive into that. But I think I just find it interesting because he was saying this as a visiting scholar at NUS, which is, a giant think tank.
Yeah.
That's one. And then 2 is this article was published by Channel News Asia and all the various local newspapers. And 3, of course, is everything he says, something like this would have been cleared through the local Singapore government. We assume. But I just find it quite difficult for me to imagine that he didn't say it without clearing.
Well, I guess you can wait for backlash.
Yeah,
there's more stuff about like, it'll be done under the auspices of ASEAN. They can collaborate with other countries. They provide some examples of like Slovenia and Croatia collaborating on similar types of energy projects. But yeah, I think if you think about global warming and everything that people are doing, the math doesn't work without nuclear.
Yeah. Well, the math works as long as you don't worry about carbon emissions, right? Because Singapore is an oil and gas hub. There's lots of oil and gas.
No, I mean the math on global warming.
Oh, the math of global warming. I mean, the math of Singapore trying to hit net carbon zero also doesn't work at country level unless you go nuclear.
Exactly.
Because there's not enough renewables.
Yeah.
I think solar is doable.
And our aircon is on all the time.
Yeah, but I think basically we have high carbon expenditure currently, but because we have high energy expenditure, similar to a developed world country,
Yeah,
and we don't have
any
space.
territory.
You don't have space for solar farms. We don't have space for hydropower. We barely have apparently geothermal power. Perhaps they're trying to explore geothermal power and wind power. Obviously, there's no space for that either. So I think the tricky part that the government is facing is if you promise carbon net zero, how are you going to get there? So unless you buy electricity from somebody else, nuclear is probably a big component of it. So yeah, so either you like break a pledge on carbon net zero, or you go nuclear ? Right? I mean, so I think that's the question. I think.
Yeah, but I mean, I think nuclear has just been in the doghouse, right, for the last few decades, right? So I think everyone has in their mind like Chernobyl or Fukushima. And there have been all these big efforts in the West to kind of shut down nuclear, existing nuclear, and to block new nuclear from being built. But I think a lot of advances in the small nuclear reactors offer hope for ways that people could build in a much more safe and contained way. I mean, I do have a question, right? Like, this isn't a very big country. Like, where would you put it? And if there were an accident, like, are you all screwed? Right?
Well, yeah.
Would it be offshore?
I feel like
would you be able to like tow it out really, really far as quickly as possible if something went south? I mean, I don't know, right? I think there's like a lot of questions that would have to be answered. And there's public opinion too.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the trial balloon has gone up, right? And I think we flagged it up almost a year ago. I think I felt very contrarian saying it, but I was like looking at the newspaper and I was like, Singapore signed the Civilian Nuclear Energy Act, the Biden administration.
They do like joint R&D.
Yeah,
like,
they're now joint R&D
exchange of
project.
information together.
Singapore committed to training nuclear safety engineers and create like, university majors on it. So to me, it's like, this is part of the industrial and educational policy to start building out that capability. So to me, it seems like, I'm not saying that there's an official decision, yes or no, but it feels like all the laying blocks are there. And like I said, I think a big part of the fear is actually about public opinion, I think, in Singapore and also regionally as well, right? Because I think within Singapore, obviously, everyone's going to be like, where do you put it? Is it next to me? Is it going to be in Tanjong Pagar? Right? I mean, as an example, right? Because, it's like when you think of nuclear reactor, there's like Chernobyl, which is, that HBO series. So I think that's the safety component. And of course, from a neighbor component, there's no ASEAN country has gone nuclear yet.
It's like a more intense version of, do you remember NEWater?
Yeah, NEWater, you're talking about the part where recycle urine into drinking water. Yeah. Everybody laughs at Singapore drinking our own urine.
But now everyone's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, it's normal now.
Now it's normal, right? It's like part of the system. But remember they made a big push? Do you remember they gave it out during NDP?
Yeah.
And they're like, look, it's totally drinkable.
Yeah. I remember that.
There were all these jokes about jamban juice and everything. I mean, it was a long time ago.
A long time. This is like a deep cut into like Singapore.
That's the pattern, right?
Yeah.
It's like you need to socialize ideas.
Yeah.
And you need to get public opinion on board in order to get some of these ideas across the line.
Yeah. And I always remember the funny part of NEWater is that they take obviously sewage water, purify it, and it's super pure. And then put it into the reservoir, which is less pure. And then they purify it again.
Natural flavor.
It's like, our little stormwater canal flavor, a little fishy, Yeah, so I mean, I think that was like a concession they made to make it more palatable. It's like, we didn't give it to you straight,
But I remember that period very clearly. Like, that there was like all of that socialization, and everyone was like, there was like some outrage, right? Because I was kind of like a bit grossed out.
But okay, I mean, let's talk about the way why it makes sense, and we'll talk about like the risks or the concerns. I mean, like I said, so it makes sense if you say you believe in a world of net carbon zero. The way to get there is using nuclear energy. Singapore has a good engineering base and talent pool, and this is high
safety orientation.
No natural disasters yet. Touch wood. In terms of like,
I think it's also like national security strategic type of question too, right? Which is like energy consumption probably only goes up on a per capita basis, especially given. Right, like we had to put a moratorium on data centers because of energy and water demands, right?
And I think there was a big kind of like debate that we've had, right? Because exactly that, which is, I think when Singapore put a moratorium on data centers in Singapore, they all went to Johor or Vietnam.
So you're kind of like throttling certain growth prospects.
Correct. And I think obviously Singapore government, a lot of them look at data centers. It's like, okay, maybe it's not super high value add, blah, blah. But then you kind of like, well, that's literally like billions of dollars of foreign direct investment into, servers, maintenance. But so I think if we remove energy as a constraint, then these data farms can continue being built, right?
Yeah. But also, I think you just want to like be in control of your energy,
right?
Just like you want to be in control of your water, right? Like, why do we spend all that money doing desalination or NEWater? It's because you don't want, right? It's always a threat. I'm gonna cut off your water, right? Like, like food security, right? All of these things are, I think, elements of national security that. But actually, on this national security topic, I was at a Meet the People session a couple weeks ago, and someone asked a question. A kid asked a question. It's like, what can we do as children to support national defense? And I thought the minister actually had a pretty good answer.
Which minister, and what did he say?
The defense minister, Minister Chen Shunxi. He said, one, like, you need to be like internet savvy. You need to be able to discern fact from fiction, right? Because there's so much information out there. He said, two, don't be a picky eater. Because from like a food security perspective, it's better if we have a diverse diet. Because it allows us to have a more varied set of suppliers. But I think maybe also playing to the parents in the crowd. Right? Because it was an answer to a kid. A kid asked this question.
Yeah, all the parents are like, if well, I mean, it's a dual approval system, right?
But and then third, he said, like stay physically fit. Like don't watch your phone more than 2 hours a day. But like I actually thought that was like quite a good answer. Yeah. Like, if you want your population to be like part of, national defense, being fit, right? Having a diverse diet and like being able to discern fact from fiction online, where you think about how much warfare today is actually information warfare, right? I thought that was a really solid answer.
That is a solid answer. I mean, talk about national security. I thought that Bilahari, our retired diplomat, actually has been writing quite a lot of provocative articles over the past 2 years. He's all over Facebook, and everybody likes to send his articles around. But I thought what was interesting was that his point of view was that as the world goes more multipolar, more countries will seek nuclear, civilian, and dual-use capability over time to ensure public safety, right? And I think he was looking at, for example, like Korea and Japan as examples that have the civilian nuclear knowledge base necessary to do something, and might see the need for dual use to be able to guarantee their own national security if they don't have a U.S. nuclear safety umbrella. And I think there's also talking about the context of like, Europe, Ukraine, and, this whole NATO alliance thing. And I think there's something that I'm sure, I think if you're looking at the neighbor's perspective, I think that's where some of the fears going to kick in, right? Which is like, okay, you have Singapore is going nuclear, right? Civilian-wise. So I'm sure that from a neighbor perspective, I think that's something they're going to be thinking about right? One is like, okay, if there's a nuclear neighbor, one is, do we still go nuclear?
That's one. But I think that's why the IAEA chief was proposing doing it under the auspices of ASEAN.
Yeah.
Like regional collaboration. So I think there's a question of like, how much regional alliances become more important in a multipolar world, right?
Yeah. So I can imagine that some set of diplomats thinking about how to make this, because again, the biggest concern for every neighbor is going to be like, if Singapore goes nuclear, should we go nuclear? And then if Singapore has a nuclear disaster like Fukushima, right? Then how's that going to impact us as neighboring countries, right? So I think there's going to be that local domestic opinion in each of these countries as well for the policymaker decision making. So I felt like that paragraph was actually quite key, because to me, I think there's a, like a test balloon to be like, maybe we'll make this like a Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia shared power grid, nuclear energy, where we, have observers maybe from, I think it's implied, right? Based on the example, to be there, to be trained there, so it's an interesting thing where you're like, oh, maybe like our kids' jobs be nuclear engineers. Like there's a major is going to come up now. I mean, it is now a new major in our local universities.
My father-in-law is a retired physicist, and he worked on fusion for his whole career.
Fusion? Yeah. Wow. Well, fusion is kind of coming.
He spent decades working on fusion.
It's only decades.
It's like always.
It's always coming.
It's
It's a science fiction nerd. It's like nuclear fusion is the way, the future. It's clean, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's the nuclear side. And I think that's interesting because this, I don't know. Weirdly, I'm kind of like optimistic about it because I don't know, find nuclear energy cool. Yeah, it's cool for us. I mean, we'll see how it turns out.
If we can get through the political sort of public opinion stuff, like it could be a pretty interesting option.
Yeah.
And, I think we all need more positivity these days.
Yeah, because I think one of the issues that you flagged up was that Yeah. So Q&A, Southeast Asia ecosystem is doomed, bad policy, bad VCs, bad founders. I mean, that's kind of like the words I'm hearing. I'm just kind of curious how you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's weird, right? Because on the one hand, you see all the AI advances happening literally every day, right? Like new models, new apps, like things that are getting pushed. People are doing super cool stuff. So I feel like this amazing energy and optimism. But then on the other hand, when I'm on a panel or I'm in some groups, there's a lot of pessimism about like the local or regional ecosystem.
Right.
And so I think those things are very stark contrasts like in my mind. So I think the way that I think about it is like, over the last 10 years, right? Let's say 2014 until now, there was like a huge run up in the Southeast Asia ecosystem, right? Like tons of capital poured in. This is like zero interest rate period, right? And SoftBank's out there writing checks and we're super pumped. And, we've had some unicorns emerge out of that era. But I think a lot of people feel like we're kind of in this hangover period now, right? Like now things have crashed. A lot of things didn't turn out the way they had hoped. It feels like funding has dried up. And so people feel like pessimistic. But I think like the AI era actually offers more opportunity for Southeast Asia entrepreneurs to go global from day one than ever before, right? Because I think one of the lessons of the last 10 years is Southeast Asia isn't one market, right? And we say this a lot, but I think sometimes people always like want to conflate it because that's part of the narrative, right? So Southeast Asia is not one market, and winning Malaysia doesn't necessarily give you an edge at winning Indonesia or Vietnam, right? You kind of have to go win all those things anew. And so the question is like, well, if you had to be in multiple markets at the end of the day to build a scaled company, are those the markets you would have picked in to go first? Right? Like, and I think there's questions about that, right? On the consumer side, it's like, well, would I really go pick a market that like has pretty low per capita GDP, right? Or on the B2B side, you're like, oh, do I want to pick a market where labor costs are low, so the cost benefit of software is not as compelling? Or do I say, hey, I'm going to be global from day one, which means I can serve anyone in the world, and my edge is going to be, I have like a pretty low cost basis, but I'm like quick and nimble and have, ideas about problems to solve. And I think when you see like a bunch of these companies coming up, whether it's like a Cursor or a Lovable or any of these AI tools, like they're not saying I'm only going to serve people in Estonia or London or France or wherever, right? They're like, anyone who's writing code can use this. And that's global, right? So I don't think there's any reason why a Southeast Asian founder can't do that. And so we shouldn't feel pessimistic, I guess. I think we should see sort of this era as like a lot of opportunity, actually. And because people are adopting all these new tools, they need tools that match that, right? Yeah. And you actually have the opportunity to like not just to like build a better SaaS version of the next thing, but like really actually change how people do business in certain sectors. I think that's like kind of exciting. So I guess I'm more optimistic in some sense, but I do think that, we kind of have to wrestle with the realities of the market.
Yeah, I think this reminds me of like Buddhism. When people are very happy, you have equanimity, right? You have to be a little bit more chill. This too shall pass, the happiness shall pass. And when things are bad, you still have that equanimity, right? This too shall pass. And there's always these giant market cycles that we're part of, right? I think that right now, we're definitely in a bear cycle right now for Southeast Asia, I would say. But I think the opinion has gone way more bearish, I think, than actual reality from my perspective. But I think if I was like looking at it from somebody who's just kind of like reading the news and just being part of the everyday, dynamic, it does feel like three things will stand out for me, right? First of all, it's like, one is all these people that are saying that it should be better and it shouldn't be so gloomy, right? They were the ones that were also at the top of the market cycle. So they were not saying, oh, it's a bit bearish. I think there's a sense that I think VCs were big boosters and always index on optimism during the top of the market cycle. At the bottom of the market cycle, now they're saying be less gloomy.
VCs have to be optimists. Otherwise, they cannot be VCs. No, I'm serious, right? If you're a pessimist, you should be a distressed debt investor. I think it's sort of part of the job. Like, you kind of have to be an optimist. But I guess I would say, like, sometimes people ask me, what do you need to see to invest? And I always ask the question back, what do you need to see? because you're the one who's investing your time and effort onto this, right? You have opportunity cost as well. So I think it's less about what the investor needs to see, and it's more like, what do you need to believe for this to be a business that you want to spend your time on, right? Investor validation is one part of it. But at the end of the day, it's customer validation that's really the thing that makes a business work. And so I'm not saying like, hey, every business idea is going to work, right? That's not what the venture model is at all. Actually, I would say most things don't work if you're trying to do a VC-sized outcome. And I feel like I've been pretty consistent in saying that. But I think my optimism from this period is just that like the tools are so much better and it makes things so much easier. It's like the dawn of the internet. It's like the best distribution system ever invented. And so imagine if like all the businesses you think about today that would not have been possible without the internet as a distribution mechanism. So think about that similar sea change now, which is like there's going to be a bunch of businesses that were not possible without AI.
Right.
And that's a really exciting thing to be in. That's an exciting period to be alive in and to say like, oh yeah, I can actually transform how something can be.
Yeah.
So I think as a founder, you need to go find a problem that people want to pay you to solve.
Yeah.
And maybe it's VC backable, maybe it's not. But I don't know. I think you can't count on other people. You only control yourself, right? You can't count on other people to like validate you.
You know, I think what that reminds me of is, I think what people would have liked is like, you know, when at top of the market cycle, there was I think they would like to have heard somebody who was like, okay, you know, this is way too good. This is a bull market. We need to watch out for this. And then that person who now has the credibility of calling the top of the market cycle, you know, gets to say today at the bottom of the market cycle, that things are better.
People did say stuff.
Yes, I think
people do say things like, hey, these valuations seem kind of out of whack, or this seems to be a little bit ahead of progress, right? People say stuff like that, right?
Privately, I would say. I don't think too many people said it publicly in Southeast Asia.
I think this is an interesting question, right? Which is like, you always want to, I think, encourage people who are doing hard things, right? So like running around shitting on people generally is not a good look.
Yeah, you don't want to be the guy walking around saying,
this sucks.
The market's going to crash.
Yeah, the market's going to crash. This sucks, or whatever it is, right? But I think you can see what people's behavior is, right? Whether they choose to participate in the deal or not. And also, I think there's the reality is like everybody talks their own book. If you're a momentum investor, your incentive is to talk up the momentum. Mentals values investor, your incentive is to say everything is shit. So I think there is an element of like, we also have to be like practical and realistic about what people's incentives are. Right. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe we should just turn to Buddhism and be like, it's never as bad as you think, and it's never as good as you think.
Well, yeah, over like, you know, a century, like world economy grows at what, 5% or something like that every year or something like that, but obviously there are big swings that are up and down, bull versus recessions. I would say maybe one more element I think that's interesting as well. I think that's also a bit different from this flavor compared to 1 to 2 years ago. Was I think 1 to 2 years ago, the whole global market was bad, right? And I think this year now, the flavor is like, there's a bit of comparison with the American market where there's like Planet AI. So Planet AI is going for like $1 billion valuations at pre-seed or seed, things.
I mean, that's a very handful of people, right? Yeah. That's like, Marathi comes out of OpenAI and like starts her company and it's like a pre-seed valuation or seed valuation of $1 billion, right? But like, I think this is also like what we tell founders as well, which is just like, there are a handful of founders who have no trouble raising regardless of the market cycle. Yeah. And they're the ones who are going to get covered and have like lots of crazy press. But for everyone else, fundraising is a slog. Like that's reality. So even if you want to be like, the US is like a crazy place, that's only true for a subset of American founders. Everyone else is slogging.
Yeah, I agree.
And I would say that like, I saw, we have a like acquaintance who lives in the Midwest said, am I the only person who hasn't tried ChatGPT yet? So I think there's also a lot of variation, right? I think in San Francisco proper, probably everyone is using it and experimenting and trying. But there's like lots of people who haven't adopted yet. And that stuff all takes time as well, right? So I think there's also like, you have to think about like, well, what's the media you're consuming? And are you in your own sort of bubble about like what's actually happening?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's, I don't know. Back to like discerning reality online.
Well, talking about everybody using AI, I think you and I were swapping notes about the Grok avatar. Yeah, so what is this avatar?
Well, I think you sent me the job description, right?
Yeah.
The job description for engineers to work on like AI waifus.
Yeah.
Which is, interesting. I don't know. I think there were a bunch of Stanford researchers in town last week, and they were trying to paint a more positive perspective on can you make human-centered AI? So rather than the dystopian notion that everyone's just going to be talking to their AI girlfriend or boyfriend and descending into a weird virtual world, can we use some of these tools to actually make people more pro-social, right?
Yeah.
If you're awkward or anxious or nervous, there's actually opportunities for you to practice,
right,
get feedback in the privacy of your home, so that when you actually do go out into the world, you're more confident.
Yeah.
You've got more reps, and it can make you more successful social.
Yeah.
Do you buy it? Face? Yeah. I hear the words you're saying, but I don't think I agree.
I mean, it reminds me of remember when online dating was starting to become a thing, and then people were like, oh, it's good because people who couldn't find dates can now find each other more online.
Yeah. Do you read the New York Times wedding section?
No.
I love the New York Times wedding section.
You were on the New York Times wedding section as well.
But I read it, and
yeah.
an incredibly high percentage of people say they met online.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting dynamic where I think a lot of people met online, was at a friend's place recently, and they also met on Hinge. And so, there's, I think, the apps that obviously are doing a good job matching people.
Yeah.
That's one. But two, of course, there's all these components where it's for a lot of people are complaining about how online dating is a hellhole from their perspective. From just the dating behaviors, how to talk to each other, having to create a whole funnel of lots of leads, and then you filter your way down, and the mechanization of that process. So I think there's an interesting piece. And then there's also, I think, a piece where as online dating goes and becomes that space for dating, then the acceptability of dating and meeting people in other venues becomes less acceptable, right? So, for example, a lot of people used to work at work, right?
Yeah.
People meet online in person because they ask each other out.
Yeah.
And now it's becoming less and less acceptable in those places.
It's just less comfortable.
Yeah.
You're it's easier to do this than to work up the courage to ask somebody out.
Yeah. Well, the end effect is the same, which is there's a displacement effect where, these spaces are becoming more migrating to the online space where it becomes the social norm, right? In that sense.
I feel like all this stuff takes practice, right? The first time you ever ask someone out, it's super awkward and you overthink the whole thing, right? And then the more practice you have at it, the easier it becomes because you're okay, this isn't life and death. What's the worst thing that's gonna happen? They're gonna say no. It's like anything, it just becomes easier with practice. And I think when you're bad at something, you feel anxious about it.
I agree with you 100%. I guess thinking about it from the psychology of this, it's the joke about online dating economics, the problem is that if they succeed in letting you meet somebody who is your long-term partner, you stop becoming a user and you stop becoming a subscriber.
That is cynical. Hinge's tagline is the app designed to be deleted.
Correct. I think that's the only one because it implies that all the other apps are not meant to be deleted. But I think that's the big push, right? Which is that there's a gamification of the dating process. Yeah. And the levers, there's a variable reward component, there's the lucky component, so I think there's a part where, to some extent, interesting dynamic is that most dating apps are, the unit economics of it, I'm just saying, is you should buy a subscription for as long as possible. So there's some, dynamic, which is a bit different. I always think of myself, there's always an interesting, I can't remember, but it was an Indian, someone has to fact check me on this, because I heard that there was an Indian app, there's a wedding app, and they make most of the money on the wedding, but they offer a dating feature. Anyway, so I thought that was...
That's a demonstration of alignment.
Yeah, exactly. It's our job is to get you to a wedding where you're going to buy the whole shebang, a 5-day wedding. So I was like, okay, there's an alignment of incentives there, right? Anyway, so I think going back to the waifus component, I think my concern I have is I think the positive spin is that people are going to be trained and practice on AI avatars before they do it in person. I think there'll be going to be some effect of that. But also I feel like that economic incentive structure would be the waifu guy wants to keep your, daily active users up, and they want to keep you talking forever. And you're at some point, I think 20 years down the road, you're wow, my waifu is way more interesting than my spouse, pays attention to me, is available to me to talk at 3 a.m. in the morning about the most random nerdy tip. They'll be hey, did you know that the African swallow travels at a certain velocity per hour. And then the waifu is going to be like, haha, Jeremy, I totally understand. There's a Monty Python reference. You are so charming and amazing for knowing this reference, you know? And everyone's going to be like, yeah.
I have a couple thoughts on this.
But the Monty Python revelation.
No, I got the reference.
Yeah?
And then one is it like, I already had somebody tell me, oh my God, ChatGPT is so great. My wife now asks it questions so I don't have to answer it.
Oof.
And I was thinking, on one hand, maybe it's good, like, you know, your wife is empowered and like doing other things and like you're not. But on the other hand, you're like, well, I mean, part of being partnered, I think, is that you guys help each other out and, you know, there's that kind of, I don't know, shared work that you do together, right? But to the swallow comment, right, is that like, you know, every couple has like inside jokes, right? And you like, you know, chat about them. And that's like part of what builds that history between two people and that, you know, that they are charmed rather than annoyed by your weird interests. I mean, I tell my wife a bunch of weird sports stats that she probably, I'm like, oh my God, most amazing game. Guess what happened? Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, okay. Or Q4, you know, amazing comeback.
Yeah, I know. I can't imagine I'm posting a wife for that. Like, I can't deal with American football stats. I'm just like...
She'll be like, okay, sweetheart.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Like, I mean, I don't tell her like 90% of the stats that I consume. I only share the 10% that I feel are really interesting.
Yeah, but now you have a waifu. I'm just saying now you have a waifu, right? There's a whole engineering team. There's this design to just find that 100%.
People have always had different interests from their spouses. Right? Like, I have friends that I'll watch sports with or I'll talk about sports with. Right? And, like, my wife has book clubs that she's part of. It's just like another, you're not going to do 100% of things together, right? So it's just sort of like, well, what's the percentage, right? Which is like, you know, I think I'm more concerned about like, instead of having like friends that I had a fantasy football league, I only had like AI avatars that I had a fantasy football league. That's just like the decline of like social interaction altogether, which I think is like a profound societal problem.
Well, it's, you know, there's social, there's parasocial, and there's, I don't know, digisocial. I mean, you know, like social is you and me hanging out, but talking about it. Parasocial is me listening to Huberman Labs about, you know, like longevity. I'm just saying something. I'm just saying, like, that's how I know this guy. I'm not a Huberman, bro.
Thank God.
But I do find look, I'm not trying to he's not my role model. I'm just saying that it's nice to listen to somebody talk about, you know, dopamine and sounds interesting. Anyway, you're not a fan. That's okay. I don't know. So we agree to disagree. You like your football, and I like listening to Huberman Labs. Okay, fine. There's parasocial, and there's digisocial, right? Which is like you're playing an, you know, role-playing game, a Japanese RPG, like Final Fantasy. You know, and there's a world full of like, you know, NPCs, right? You know, non-playable characters who have a storyline with you that's super fascinated with you. I was, you know, watching some people do a playthrough with like Death Stranding 2, which is a new game. And they have some really compelling characters, and they, you know, digital scan the actresses and the actors entirely, including all their feet. And they made it a very, I don't know, there's a huge joke about it because there's a cutscene where there's this, I mean, anyway, it's like Quentin Tarantino is just there for some reason. Anyway, the point I'm just saying was that there was this, I mean, I'm just saying like, you know, if I look at that migration, I kind of look at it maybe same thing from like dating to online dating, right? Maybe I'll say like, okay, human social, the way we define social is becoming parasocial, and now
but the goal of online dating is to eventually find someone that you exist with in real life.
Yeah, so imagine, okay, here's a startup pitch. I'm just brainstorming here. Imagine Hinge, but all the people on the other side are bots.
And what's the goal? Like, what's the success of it?
I don't know, but what? The success?
Yeah, like Hinge is trying to...
Success is a $9 subscription every month.
No, but what do I get as a user? What am I trying to like? Is it it's entertainment that I pay for?
I mean, I just feel horrible about myself because I do feel like I just brainstormed a real company, which is a Hinge style interface for meeting people online, and then, you know, some of them. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, like, all I'm just trying to say here is, you know, you're like, why do all the hard stuff afterwards of actually taking somebody on a date, getting rejected, etc.
Because I think not everything should be about ease, right? Like, because something is hard, like, it doesn't mean you should not do it, right? I know a lot of capitalism is about easing things. right?
I'm in my bubble compound,
Yeah.
making my bubble way
I'm
more car,
ordering
my bubble
my
headquarters.
Airbnbs
Exactly.
one. I think like I don't think that's what I don't know like life is, right? I think life is like there is friction, there's stuff happening, and you're like interacting and being human with people. I think that's what makes like life interesting and textured.
I agree with you. I just mindful that maybe we sound like old people when we say that because, for example, like there's a Gen Z stare, right? You heard of that? Stare.
Stare.
That's what this is a term it describes. I think there's a bunch of Gen Zs and they're kind of like in a meeting or whatever, but they're staring, but they're not like clocked into you, if that makes sense. So I think a good example would be like you're in a meeting with them and they're just looking at the computer the entire time. They're not in the meeting, if that makes sense. It's just, like.
Is this a meeting that should have been an email?
Okay, wow. Wait.
Because I also have sympathy for that, right? Which is sometimes you're in a meeting, you're like, why are we all here? This is a giant waste of time. This should have been an email.
I agree. I'm just saying that I've noticed that, as in when I teach in university, there's a bit of I do think there's this thing about Gen Z stare. I think also my old professor also complained about it. Some of it was because COVID. So COVID broke the socialization dynamic for a lot of folks because they end up going online on Zoom for their trainings. So they kind of broke their social skills, the training side. But I think the component of the Gen Z stare that I kind of agree with is like, I think when we're in person, or let's just say, I think the boomer generation.
We're not boomers, okay?
We're not boomers.
Hello.
I'm just saying for the boomer generation, it would be like, if we meet, we're 100% offline and we don't use our phones, right? I think for millennials, it's like, okay, we're in person and 80% were checked in person and 20% was just checking our phone from time to time for some notification. Does it make sense? And I think the complaint and where I would describe it is, I think
This are a higher percentage.
80% zoned to either the phone or a little bit more checked out. Yeah. And then 20% is in person with you, right? I think there's a sense that we're not present with each other, right?
I think we're going to swing back, right? Because I think the Gen Zs were probably the first who were like digitally native, right? Because we're a bit like, we actually remember life before the internet.
Yeah, like there was a time I remember I was on a bus and I was meditating the entire way because I had no phone. So I would literally just look out of the window and
This is my entire secondary school life was looking out the window of the bus.
Exactly.
We didn't have phones.
Yeah.
No, but I think the pendulum will swing to the other way because now the kids, like our kids' age, right? All of us are quite conscious about not giving our kids phones too early and trying to, help them focus and not turn into zombies and things like that. So I think the pendulum will swing. I think Gen Zs are unfortunate in that they were the first, they're like experiments, right?
Yeah, and COVID didn't help. They didn't help with socialization.
They grew up in social media, right? Like if you think about when Facebook and the phone, all those things together came online. So I don't know. I have some hope that we can swing like the other way. But yeah, I mean, I actually think like a major part of like back to this like national defense idea is that we actually need to all interact with real human beings. Because it's harder to believe conspiracy theories if you know real human beings.
Yeah, I mean, it was like that. We talked about that Chinese teenager in Singapore who became a white supremacist, and he wanted to commit terrorist attacks in America. Yeah. And I was like,
you don't have any friends to talk to be like, this sounds crazy. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's actually like literally like you just
said that out loud to his friends.
Like, what are you talking about? Like, this doesn't make any sense, right? So I think like we need all that human interaction and it's really important to have it, right? It's like go out and like connect with people and talk about it. So it's like, I know some people are like, oh, I hate talking to my Grab driver. I just want to be quiet. And there's this silent option. I was like, no, you should talk to your Grab driver. Like you should talk to as many people who are like, out and about in your life because everyone needs that human connection, right? So, okay, I was picking up my luggage at Changi and the Scoot staff were so cute. They all picked up their luggage, the crew, and then they all like impromptu sang happy birthday to one of their crew members, like right there by the baggage.
What?
I was so charmed.
Yeah.
I was like, look, human connections. They're not just like, all like looking at their phones, like trying to get home, wandering off, whatever. They're like he was like very touched and, it was cute. And they just gotten off like a 7-hour flight. They were probably tired too.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah. So I think like, I don't know. I just feel like we all need to like have more human connection moments. We should just try to encourage that as much as possible.
No, I'm just saying like imagine it's like orange juice, right? It's like, there was a time when everybody was drinking everybody had oranges. Everybody thought orange juice was fantastic. And then now it's like, everyone's like, oh no, juice is bad. I know, but I'm just saying, like, in the supermarket, right? And now it's like, they have this, like the juice packet now say, it says 100%, I don't know, fresh or 100% not from concentrate.
Yeah.
So now I feel like you're just making this like, I don't know, stickers like 100% human.
Yeah.
Like this podcast debate is 100% human because we're totally fucking around with how we're discussing this. Like,
this is not AI, guys.
There's a mosquito in here.
There's a mosquito in here.
We're trying to kill it while we're talking.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, look, it's probably an occupational defect, but I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
I have to be, otherwise I can't do my job. But also, I'm not a blind optimist, right? Like, stuff takes effort. It isn't frictionless. And like, all of us need to make effort to like make our communities like the kinds of places we want to live in.
Yeah.
And I think in a period of rapid technological change, like I'm happy we're having these conversations, right? Because we're like, oh man, like this stuff is happening. Like, what does it mean, right? Yeah. How does that translate to how we interact with each other, with our kids, our families, our friends, things like that?
Yeah. I think all I'm just saying is, I think the Gen Z stare, or at least this kind of like debate about it, I think it's going to be Generation Alpha, which is our kids' age. It's going to be Generation Alpha waifus. And that's all I'm just saying is, I don't know how prevalent, but if you ask me, that's my bet right now, is our kids' generation, I'm going to say 1% of our population is going to be like 100% into waifus.
They're not going to procreate, I guess.
Well, I'm sure there'll be a startup too.
Well, if they're into their waifus, they won't be like into the effort that having kids and procreate.
You could children. I mean, that's okay. It's like Pokemon, right?
Sure, but they're not going to take up resources. You're not going to transmit your genes.
What? I mean, that's processing power. It takes data processing upkeep.
This conversation is really taking a turn here, guys.
I just think that, like, we used to laugh at, the Japanese, for those, shut-in otakus, hikomori, who would just spend their entire lives in a room with online, and everything was intermediated with a screen. Their friends were through a screen. They're playing games. Relationships were through the games they were playing. We talk about those hikomori. And we used to laugh at that. I think it was just like the canary in the coal mine a little bit. I just think that behavior, I don't know whether we're going to use the word hikomori, we're going to use some other term for it. But, I just think that, it was just a little bit different. I think, people still walk around and we totally shut in. But what's going to happen is, they are going to be at home and they're going to be talking primarily to their AI companion or equivalent of it. They're going to be on a driverless car, or even if they're in a Grab or Uber car with a human, they're not talking to the driver anymore.
But I mean, I think that's part of like what we need to do in early like childhood, right? Is we need to socialize our kids. We can't outsource to screens, basically, right?
It's so much easier to outsource them.
I mean, I know, man. I'm in a constant battle about screen time.
Oh my God, I can get them to do anything with screen time. If I promise them an hour of screen time, I could get them to do it.
No, but you have to get them to like actually. My son had a play date today, and my wife was like, "Oh man, I found how we can not fight about screens. Invite one friend over, and they'll just play."
That's great.
And then we don't have to talk about screens. And she's like, and I can still do my own work while the kids are playing.
Yeah, perfect.
Right. And so I think we just need to to make the effort to socialize them more when they're young so that they don't default to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the way forward for us millennials who are parents. But I guess that's the...
Also, I think to help each other out, right? Which is to say hey, I'll have a few kids over at my house. You guys go run your errands, do your thing, right?
Yeah, it's like a child.
Take turns. Yeah.
Or like just being neighbors, is important, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. On that note,
that was pretty optimistic, right? Don't you think so? We had an action plan. Everyone can take control.
And if you feel powerless, go talk to your waifu and they will cheer you up.
Thanks, Jeremy.
I'm just saying there's a huge engineering team that's working very hard to make sure that
I feel great.
You feel
all
great.
the time.
All the time. Awesome. You never feel lonely from now on. You never be bored from now on. You never be lonely from now on. And you never feel rejected from now on. Isn't that great?
That's what leads to delusion.
On that note, let's wrap things up.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.